At the family Christmas party, they gave gifts to everyone. One by one, the kids were called up, cousins from out of state, nieces and nephews I hadn't seen in years. Even Lexi, who was born just last spring, got a box wrapped in gold foil with her name on it. My daughter, Lena, sat patiently, smiling the way she always does when she's trying to be polite. She's 9, old enough to understand when something's not right, but still too young to know how to speak up in a room full of adults. The pile of presents slowly disappeared. Crumpled paper gathered at people's feet. The laughter got louder. And then silence. There were no gifts left under the tree. Not a small one, not a forgotten one, hiding behind a stocking. Nothing. Lena looked down at her hands. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She just folded them neatly in her lap and said nothing. I saw the way her fingers twisted slightly, the way her foot tapped against the leg of the chair. That was how I knew she was hurt, and no one said a word. My heart was pounding, but I stayed still. I watched the people around us. My husband's cousins, his uncles, his sister, even his mother, Deborah, move on like nothing had happened. Wrapping paper crinkled. Someone turned the music back up. Lena had spent 3 nights drawing a card for Deborah. She used gold glitter for the edges and wrote, "Merry Christmas, Grandma," in her best handwriting. I remembered her asking if she should give it to her before or after she opened her gift. She never got the chance to decide. I leaned forward to say something, to call it out, to demand an explanation. But before I could speak, Eli stood up. My husband doesn't make scenes. He's the one who de-escalates, who smooths over conflict with quiet phrases and calm glances. But this time, he didn't look calm. He walked over to the fireplace, reached behind one of the stockings, and pulled out a white envelope. He turned around to face the room. "This," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "was supposed to be opened last." The entire room froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Deborah narrowed her eyes. Lena looked up from her lap. Eli walked the envelope over to her. He didn't say anything else, just handed it to our daughter and nodded. And for the first time all night, every single person in that room paid attention. Christmas Eve had always been a big deal at the Morgan house. Eli's parents, Deborah and Walter, hosted it every year in their oversized 2-story home just outside Columbus. The kind of place with a 7-foot artificial tree in the front window, garland on the staircase, and a buffet table lined with store-bought platters from the same upscale market they always bragged about. Everything looked perfect, but it always felt cold. This was my 11th year spending the holidays with them. I knew the rhythm by now, who brought which casserole, which cousin would arrive late, and how Deborah would give me that once-over as soon as I walked through the door. Her comments were never direct, but always sharp. "You wore flats again this year?" she asked, smiling as she kissed my cheek. "Comfort first, I suppose." I smiled back and didn't flinch. I had stopped reacting a long time ago. Eli squeezed my hand as we stepped inside, our daughter Lena holding tightly onto mine. She wore a red velvet dress with a white bow clipped into her curls. She had insisted on bringing the Christmas card she made for Deborah. She drew a fireplace, a tree, and Deborah holding a tray of cookies with "To Grandma, Love Lena" written in gold marker. Eli's sister, Melissa, was already there with her kids, plus a dozen cousins and extended relatives I saw once a year, but never really got to know. They all greeted each other like one big, happy family. I stood at the edges, helping Lena out of her coat and hanging it next to the others. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who treat you like a guest in a life you married into. I knew most of their names. I remembered birthdays and sent thank you cards, but I was never one of them. Not really. Eli felt it too, I think, but he never said it out loud. He loved his family. He didn't want to pick sides. I never asked him to. Lena tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Can I give Grandma my card now?" Her eyes were bright and her cheeks were already flushed from the cold. "Maybe wait until after presents," I told her. "She might be busy right now." We moved to the living room. The tree was lit, the fireplace was on, and the floor beneath the tree was packed with gifts. Boxes in every shape and size, all carefully wrapped with matching ribbons. Deborah always insisted on color-coded wrapping paper to keep everything organized. Walter handed out drinks while Melissa's husband passed around appetizers. Christmas music played softly in the background. On the surface, it looked like a picture-perfect holiday. Lena settled onto the rug with the other kids, talking quietly with her cousins. She had her card in her lap, folded neatly, ready to go. I stayed behind her, sitting on the couch between Eli and an empty space no one filled. The smell of cinnamon and pine hung in the air. Laughter bubbled up across the room. Small talk echoed off the walls. And yet I felt something off, like a ripple beneath the surface. It was subtle, but I noticed. Deborah hadn't said a single word to Lena. No compliment on her dress, no hug, just a quick glance and a distracted, "Oh, hi, sweetie," before she turned to fix the bows on the presents. I watched Lena's face. She noticed it too. She didn't say anything, but I saw her smile falter for a second before she turned her attention to her cousin Abby. The tension in my chest started to build, quietly, the way it always did when we visited. I told myself to stay calm, to let it play out. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Then Deborah stood near the fireplace and clapped her hands. "Let's do presents before dessert, kids first." Eli leaned back beside me, rubbing his hands together. I tried to match his energy. Lena looked up and straightened her dress. "Let's see," Deborah said, picking up a gold gift from the pile. "This one's for Connor." The first name, then another. One by one, children's names filled the room, laughter, ripping paper, thank yous tossed toward adults. The stack of gifts began to shrink. Lena leaned forward a little, still holding her card, still smiling. I held my breath and watched. This was the part where the night began to change. The gift exchange had always followed the same order: kids first, then adults. Deborah stood near the tree, lifting each carefully wrapped box, reading the tag out loud and calling the child's name like she was announcing winners at a school raffle. She beamed at the reactions, clapped her hands when a gift got a big response, and chuckled when wrapping paper was shredded too fast to admire. "Connor," she called, handing a large red and green box to her oldest grandson. Then came Emma, Ava, Tyler, and Jasmine. She even pulled out a small plush-wrapped package and said, "This one's for Lexi, her first Christmas." Lexi was barely 6 months old, lying half asleep in her mother's arms. Everyone clapped and cooed. Lena clapped too. I kept my eyes on the pile. I counted what was left, only a handful. I reminded myself there were probably still more for Lena. Maybe something got misplaced. Maybe her name just hadn't come up yet. Deborah reached for a silver-wrapped box. "Owen," she said. The boy ran forward, took the gift, and returned to his seat. 2 gifts left now. I sat up straighter. "One for Abby," Deborah said. She passed it to Melissa, who handed it to her daughter. Then she picked up the final gift. It was long and thin, wrapped in blue paper with a white ribbon. Deborah squinted at the tag and smiled. "Ah, for Logan." Logan, a cousin's stepson. He didn't even share the family name. He took the gift with a quick nod. Everyone watched him unwrap a remote-controlled car. I waited for Deborah to say something else, to pull out one last surprise, maybe one she had hidden behind the tree. But she turned to Walter and said, "All right, that's the last one." Someone turned the music up a notch. People started chatting again. One of Eli's uncles reached for another drink. A few of the kids began playing with their new toys in the corner. Lena sat still, cross-legged on the rug, her card still clutched gently in her hands. She looked up at me, not with tears, not with questions, just a small, tired smile, one that tried too hard to look fine. I leaned forward. "Lena," I whispered, "did you check the tags? Maybe there's one left." She shook her head, slow and certain. "Number that was all of them." Her voice was soft, but I could hear the effort behind it. She was trying not to make a scene. She was trying to act like she didn't care. I felt something tighten inside me, something sharp and hot. I looked toward Deborah. She was laughing at something Melissa said, sipping from a wine glass, already moving on. She had looked Lena in the eye when she called every other child's name. She had seen her sitting there, and she had chosen not to say anything. This wasn't a mistake. Lena unfolded the card in her lap and looked down at it. Her fingers traced the edge of the paper. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask where her gift was. She just sat there, pretending like it didn't matter. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Eli was next to me, unusually quiet. He hadn't spoken once since the gifts began. I looked at him. His eyes were locked on Lena, his jaw tight. Something was building behind his silence. "I'm going to say something," I said under my breath. Wait, he replied. Just wait a second. For what? He didn't answer. I sat back, my hands clenched, heart pounding. My daughter had been excluded in front of more than 20 people, and no one said a word. Not Melissa, not Walter, not a single cousin or aunt or uncle. The silence was almost worse than the slight itself. It was a shared decision to ignore it, to let it happen. I reached for Lena's hand. She let me take it, but her eyes were still fixed on the empty space beneath the tree. The music played. Conversations picked up. A tray of cookies was passed around, but I couldn't hear anything clearly anymore. All I could feel was the burn of humiliation from my daughter and the ache of every moment she would remember from this night. And then Eli stood up. He didn't say a word at first. He walked to the fireplace and reached behind one of the stockings. When he turned around, he was holding a plain white envelope. He looked around the room. This, he said, his voice steady, was supposed to be opened last. The room went still. People stopped talking. Deborah slowly turned her head. Melissa blinked, confused. Every pair of eyes followed Eli as he walked the envelope across the room and gently placed it in Lena's hands. Eli handed the envelope to Lena and stepped back. No one moved. The air in the room changed, like someone had cracked open a window in the middle of a snowstorm. The warmth was gone, replaced by something sharp and cold. Lena looked at the envelope, confused. It was unmarked, just a plain white rectangle sealed at the flap. No ribbon, no tag, no decoration. She held it delicately, like it might break in her hands. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Eli said gently. She glanced at me, as if asking permission. I nodded. My throat was tight and my hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. "It's okay, open it." Around us, voices had fallen silent. People were watching, but trying not to make it obvious. Some shifted in their seats. Others sipped their drinks with sudden interest in the floor. Deborah crossed her arms. Her mouth pressed into a thin, irritated line, like someone had interrupted a speech she hadn't finished giving. Lena carefully tore the envelope open along the top. She reached inside and pulled out two things. The first was a small stack of white papers folded together. The second was a handwritten note, written in blue ink. She opened the note first and read quietly, her lips moving as her eyes followed the words. When she finished, she looked up at her dad with wide eyes. "What does it say?" I asked her. She looked back down and read it aloud, her voice barely more than a whisper. "To my daughter, Lena, for the girl who brings light wherever she goes. Let's chase the northern lights this year. Iceland awaits. Love, Dad." A hush fell over the room, thicker than before. Even the music in the background felt like it had faded out. Lena looked at the folded papers again and opened them. Inside were two printed tickets, one adult, one child, departing from Chicago to Reykjavik, round trip, first class. I looked at Eli, stunned. "You planned this?" I asked, my voice low. He nodded, not taking his eyes off Lena. "Weeks ago. I booked it the same night she told me she wanted to see the stars somewhere that didn't have streetlights." I remembered the conversation. It had happened while Lena was sitting in the back seat, staring out the car window. She had asked why stars looked different in some places. Eli had told her about places where the sky stretched forever, where the air was clean and the world felt quiet. She had asked if we could go. He had said someday. He made it now. Lena stood up, still holding the envelope and the tickets. Her voice was small but clear. "We're really going?" Eli bent down to her level. "We are. You and me, northern lights, hot cocoa, snowmobiles, all of it." She threw her arms around him and hugged him tight. Her red bow pressed into his shoulder. She buried her face in his neck. For the first time all evening, she wasn't pretending to be okay. She didn't have to. I felt tears well up, but I didn't wipe them away. I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to know that this moment meant something bigger than a plane ticket. It was a correction, a declaration. She had been made invisible, and now her father was making sure she was seen in the most undeniable way. Across the room, Deborah's expression tightened. She picked up a discarded piece of wrapping paper and smoothed it flat against her knee, like it mattered. Walter cleared his throat but said nothing. Someone murmured, "Wow," behind us. Eli stood up and put his arm around me. She needed something that wouldn't be forgotten, he said, "so I made sure it wouldn't be." Melissa walked over, smiling nervously. That's incredible, Eli." "Iceland?" He nodded. "It's her dream. I figured Christmas was the right time to give her something unforgettable." Deborah didn't say a word. She stood slowly, smoothed the front of her sweater, and walked toward the kitchen. I watched her go. For the first time in 11 years, I didn't care what she thought. She had made her choice. So had we. Lena looked up at me, beaming. "Mom, are you coming too?" "Not this time, baby," I said. "This is just for you and Daddy." She hugged me next, tightly, and I held her like she might disappear if I let go too soon. This moment belonged to her. All of it. Lena stayed close to Eli the rest of the evening. She held the envelope tightly in one hand and the card she had made for Deborah in the other. She didn't bring it up again. She didn't ask why she hadn't gotten a gift like the others. She didn't look for one. It was as if the weight of being forgotten had been lifted the moment she felt chosen. That feeling radiated from her. The other kids noticed. Abby came over and asked about the trip. Then Logan chimed in with questions about volcanoes. For the first time all night, Lena was at the center of the conversation, not because someone invited her in, but because something about her had become undeniable. Eli didn't brag. He didn't gloat. He sat on the couch, arm wrapped around Lena, quietly answering her questions about Iceland, describing glaciers and black sand beaches like he had been there a dozen times. He hadn't, but he had studied every detail. I realized then that this wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't a way to make up for something that had gone wrong tonight. He had planned it knowing exactly what might happen. He had anticipated this moment. I walked into the kitchen to grab Lena a bottle of water. Deborah was there, arranging store-bought sugar cookies on a tray like it was the most important job in the world. Her lips were tight, her movements mechanical. She glanced at me. That was quite the announcement. I didn't respond right away. I opened the fridge, pulled out the water, and shut the door. The silence between us grew tense. She turned back to the tray. "You know, it would have been nice to know about that ahead of time, so we could avoid this kind of scene." "This kind of scene?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. Deborah placed a cookie with more force than necessary. Making a child feel excluded on Christmas doesn't reflect well on this family. "She didn't make herself feel excluded," I said, "and neither did I. She noticed. Everyone did." Deborah looked at me for a second, then turned back to her tray. "It wasn't intentional. We had so many to keep track of this year. Melissa's kids, the cousins from Chicago. Things slip through the cracks. She's not a slip. She's your granddaughter." Her hand paused. "I didn't mean—" "But you did," I said, cutting her off. "You've always meant to keep me and her just outside the circle. You've never tried to hide it. Tonight was just the first time it showed that clearly to everyone else." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I waited for an apology that didn't come. I walked out and left her in the kitchen with her perfect tray of cookies. Back in the living room, Lena had moved to sit in front of the fireplace again. The other kids were showing off their toys, and she was describing a video she saw once about the blue ice caves in Iceland. Her eyes sparkled. Her voice had energy again. I sat beside Eli and leaned against him. "You knew this might happen," I said quietly. He nodded. "I saw the list Deborah made last week. Lena wasn't on it. I asked her about it. She said it was just a draft, but I knew. You didn't tell me. I wanted to. But I also wanted to give Lena something no one else could take away. Something private. Something just for her." I looked at him. "You gave her so much more than a trip." He glanced at Lena, then back at me. "She'll never forget tonight, but now she'll remember how it ended." As the night wore down and families started packing up, people came over to say goodbye. Some of them congratulated Lena on her trip. A few complimented Eli for the idea. Deborah stayed in the kitchen, pretending not to notice the shift in the room. Lena came up to me as I was gathering our coats. She held up her card. "Should I still give this to Grandma?" I looked at it. The gold glitter had smudged at the corners, but the drawing was still bright and hopeful. "You can," I said, "but you don't have to." She stared at the card for a moment. Then she folded it once, carefully, and tucked it into her backpack. "I want to keep it," she said. That was the most powerful choice she could have made. We drove home in silence for the first 20 minutes. Lena had fallen asleep in the back seat with her seatbelt still fastened, the envelope tucked between her arms like a keepsake she didn't want to let go. Her red bow was slipping out of her curls, and her cheek was pressed against the car window, fogging the glass with every soft breath. I watched her in the rearview mirror while Eli kept his eyes on the road. Snow flurries had started again, brushing across the windshield like white noise. I didn't speak. I didn't want to break the stillness that had settled in the car like a fragile piece. Finally, Eli spoke. I hated watching that, I nodded. I know. I should have done more earlier. I saw it coming. I thought maybe Deborah would surprise me this year. She didn't. No, he said. She didn't. I looked at him. His hand was tight on the steering wheel, not angry, just steady. The way someone looks when they've made peace with a hard truth. She made a choice tonight, I said. And so did you. He glanced at me. Did I handle it right? You showed up for your daughter when it mattered. That's always right. When we got home, Eli carried Lena upstairs to bed without waking her. I followed behind him, switched on her nightlight, and pulled her blankets up to her chin. She stirred for a second, then turned onto her side, still holding the envelope. I stood there in the doorway, watching her sleep. A part of me ached for what she had felt earlier. The confusion, the disappointment, the quiet acceptance. But another part of me was proud of how she handled it, of how she didn't let it define her, and most of all, of the way she had come through it with her head held high. The next morning, Lena joined us at the kitchen table with a map of Iceland she had printed from the computer. She asked a dozen questions about geysers and northern lights and reindeer. She talked like someone who had found something new inside herself. Not just excitement about a trip, but the kind of confidence that only grows after you've been seen fully and loved deeply. Later that day, Eli got a call from Deborah. He didn't answer. He stared at the screen for a long time before silencing it and sliding it back onto the counter. She'll probably say it was an accident, I said. She will, he replied. But it wasn't. We both knew that, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to fix it or smooth it over. There was nothing left to explain. Family isn't just blood. It's not wrapped up in obligations or forced invitations or pretending that love is present when it's not. Family is made in the choices we make, in the people we stand beside, in how we show up for each other when it would be easier to stay silent. That night, as I tucked Lena into bed again, she pulled out the card she had made for Deborah, the one she chose not to give. "Do you think Grandma will be mad I didn't give her this?" she asked. I knelt beside her bed. "I think Grandma will wonder where it went, and maybe that's okay." Lena looked down at the glittery edges and then back at me. "Can I keep it? Just for me?" "Yes," I said. "You can always keep what you make with love, even if it wasn't given to the person you made it for." She smiled. "I think I'll keep it in my suitcase." "For Iceland?" She nodded. "So I remember this Christmas. All of it." That was when I realized something important. She wouldn't remember the silence or the missing gift as much as she would remember the moment her dad handed her that envelope and everyone turned to see her for the first time. That was the memory she would carry, not the exclusion, the recognition. She wasn't overlooked, not in the way that truly matters. She was chosen. Thanks for spending this time with me and hearing our story. I didn't share it for sympathy. I shared it because I know what it feels like to watch your child be overlooked, and I also know how powerful it is when someone who loves them steps up and makes it right. If this story meant something to you or reminded you of your own family moments, please take a second to like the video. It really helps more people find it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet love can speak louder than anything else. And if you want more real, emotional stories like this one, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Drop a comment below if you've ever had a moment where someone made your child feel invisible, or where someone reminded them just how much they mattered. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.